All right, welcome to another meeting of the Senate Judiciary Committee. Today we are considering one House bill, and that is House Bill 172, Repeal Gun-Free Zones and Preemption Amendments. Before we get into the bill, we will go ahead and take roll.
Senator Crago,
Here.
Senator Crum,
Here.
Senator Hicks,
Excused?
Senator Cole,
Present.
Chairman Olson.
Here.
You have a quorum.
All right. Representative Haroldson. You want to introduce this bill to us and walk us through it?
Thank you, Chairman Olson and committee. It's good to be before you guys. And it's interesting. It's funny. We've served together on committees and now we're on the opposite side. So it's good to have you guys continuing in the process, and glad that today we can have a conversation about gun-free zones again. So before you guys is House Bill 172. And what we'll do is we'll kind of walk through the couple different elements and then also I have a couple of amendments that I've handed out for you guys to consider if you feel that they would make good additions. So page 1, line 11, we see that section 6-8-105 is being created in this bill. And there's kind of two sides to this bill. There's more of a government building, governmental side to this bill, and then the educational side to this bill. So if we move into page 2, starting on line 7, we see that persons lawfully carrying concealed weapons in Wyoming under statute 68104A II through IV4. So this is actually talking about constitutional carry as well as concealed carry permits. That's covered in this. And so constitutional carry and concealed carry, any meeting of a government entity, any meeting of the legislature or committee thereof, and any public building not otherwise prohibited under this subsection or regulated under this section. And also with that, and it's later in the bill, we can talk about it, but we've also addressed and had a conversation in regards to open carry. We didn't want, and this is actually something we brought into the bill last year, but we did not want there to be a situation where someone slings their AR and stands in the balcony at the Senate or the House, trying to make a statement saying, well, you took away gun-free zones, we have all the right to do this. Well, we want this to be a situation where people have the opportunity to protect themselves and do that in a concealed carry manner. And so that's something that is, I think, important to understand, that really this eliminates that conversation. The other thing that we also addressed is the Geringer executive order that was directed towards staff and employees of the state. And so that will also be eliminated by this text. Moving on to page 3. And actually we'll start at the bottom of page 2. It kind of changes gears so that section B is governmental. Section C is now talking about concealed carry weapons with a permit in the educational establishment. So this is Wyoming issue concealed carry permit, and anywhere having to do with K through 12 education, college educational facilities, concealed carry permit is required for carry on these facilities. And so if you go to page 3, starting in line 1, it says any public school, public college, or university athletic event taking place on public property that does not sell alcoholic beverages. Why did we put this in? University of Wyoming student section game day. I don't think I need to talk any more than that. I mean, that's just probably not what we're trying to establish. Also there's two aspects I think that are important to understand. There is a protection aspect already given with armed security at those games if there were to be a situation. Now, there's not a prevention piece, and we could have that conversation, but there is a protection piece. And so that was a request of our university in regards to games, and that was something we put in.
Sorry, I got lost. Show me where in the bill you're talking about right now with the the security feature.
Okay, so actually it's not in the bill.
It's not in the bill.
I'm just saying what's current practice at our games
okay.
is there is armed security at the games currently. So let me give you guys kind of a conversation that as we've looked at these different areas, what we've been addressing. prevention and protection. So if you were to talk about a courtroom, well, there's prevention and protection, a metal detector and an armed security guard. Correctional facilities. If you're going to go into a correctional facility, as in my other life, that's something I do on a very regular basis, visiting individuals that are in those facilities. Obviously, as you go in there, they make sure you have no weapons on you, and there's an armed guard that's with you, right? So there's that prevention protection. So if I use that term through here, that's what I'm talking about. And in the area of these athletic events with alcohol being served, there is a protection aspect of armed security, but there's no prevention aspect. They're not wanding people down or sending people through a metal detector as we go into these athletic events. So but that's something I feel that is an intelligence issue of saying, hey, we don't want to bring high levels of alcohol, students, and firearms together into the same place. Then subsection 2, line 5, page 3, any public elementary or secondary school facility. And then section III, any public college or university facility. And then, so this right here is the 3 kind of pillars of this: university, the athletic sporting events conversation, K through 12 establishment, and then colleges and universities. Then our next section, section D, nothing in this section shall be construed to. So this is this is basically the exemption section, or places that are exempt. So nothing in this will actually be construed to prohibit under that 68104T, which is our line of all of the exempted places, like courtrooms and penitentiaries and those types of areas. And then prohibiting a private property owner from restricting firearms on his private property. This is important to understand. Nowhere in this bill are we taking away private property rights. If you have a restaurant, or if you have a gym or whatever, and you do not want a firearm on that property and it's privately funded, privately owned, you have that right. Just as much as someone has the right to say, due to that, I choose not to go to your establishment, whatever it is, that's that private property right. And then number 3, prohibiting a governmental entity from prohibiting the open carry, display, or wearing of a firearm into a meeting of that government entity. And then it also went further, and we actually brought into this also the conversation about our universities and our higher educational facilities. So open carry on campus is not going to be something that will be allowed under this either. And then the allowing of a concealed weapon into facilities where otherwise prohibited by law, the federal side. In this bill, we don't have the ability to take and dictate how the federal is going to regulate their buildings or their establishments in our state. So then, if you go on to page 4 in subsection 5, or V, allowing the carrying of a concealed weapon within state agencies operated health and human services settings, health and human services facilities that are licensed by the Department of Family Services. And then we also brought in Department of Corrections here, because there was a concern by our Department of Corrections that there would be an issue of, as we are having the conversation about probation, parole, and those offices, and not having a protection in those places. Same type of conversation as family services. So that was something we brought in as well. So the Department of Correction, or health and human service facilities that are certified by the Behavioral Health Division of the Department of Health to provide residential services. And then the next section, VI, conceal and carry weapons with any facility where explosive or volatile material are present. We added a little bit of language this year because there was a concern brought to us that the conversation of volatile material, by definition, volatile material could include down to the permanent marker on the whiteboard behind you type concept. And so we made it clear that that's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is facilities or situations where if a firearm were to be discharged, we could have an explosion or could cause severe damage. So in a lab situation or something of that nature. So we added in, for the purpose of this paragraph, explosive or volatile material shall not include materials that are either in insufficient amount or in the form that the material may not reasonably cause serious bodily injury due to the material's explosive or volatile nature. And then moving on, so then we just did a little bit of wordsmithing here, and we brought in another amendment where it took 2 to 4 and carrying. So it reads, any person who knowingly prohibits entry to another person for lawfully carrying a concealed weapon to a place authorized pursuant to subsection B and C. This is brought to us by our police and sheriffs with their concern that we didn't want it to be a situation where someone said, let's say they became belligerent or out of control at an event, and they said, well, you threw me out just because I had a concealed carry handgun on me. And so this clarifies that, where that is not the case. If you get thrown out because of a decision you've made or something you've done, and that has nothing to do with the firearm, but if you are removed because of the firearm in that place, that's not acceptable. So moving on, in that section 2 is kind of the teeth of it, and the 1 year and the $2,000 fine. But moving on to page 5, we brought the language back in like we did last year with schools. And we talked about the schools can continue with their training and education of teachers and arming of teachers, and that entire statute was brought into here. But one aspect of that, we made sure that if a school chose not to go down this road and armed teachers or armed teachers, that those teachers still had the right with a concealed carry permit to be able to carry in the school. And this is all just that training and what that training looks like. So this is we're bringing this over. We have brought this information or this language over from current statute. And then if you go on to page 7, you see that conversation about the preemption laws and kind of how this works into the preemption laws with the legislature making this decision. And then if you look on page 8, section 3, kind of another very important aspect here is the repealer section of this, of what is being repealed as this statute is being written. So, and then with that, I'd ask for any questions.
Committee. Senator Crago.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Harrelson, it's good to see you.
Good seeing you.
So, question, page 2, line 21. So the meat, really the most of this bill only applies to Wyoming concealed carry permits. Is that right?
Representative Harrelson.
Thank you very much, Chairman and Senator Crago. It's weird saying that. Senator Crago, yes, okay. Absolutely, this is only Wyoming permits, Wyoming issued permits. And if you don't mind me just bringing a little bit of context in there, K through 12, because of the Firearm Act, the way that this is legal is in there it states that we have the opportunity or the ability to use a state issued permit or a state issued license to work around that. And that's what Utah and other states have used, as well as a state of origin issued license.
Senator Crago?
Follow up.
Yes.
Representative Harrelson, so, you probably know where I'm going with my next question, which is how do we eliminate the confusion, right? So your relative who lives in the state right next to us, who does have reciprocity, walks over here, drives over here, literally maybe just across the border, and they have concealed carry. You, as a Wyoming resident, can walk in to any of these particular locations with your permit, but they cannot. And I guess I'm a little bit concerned about, and I don't think I caught this last year or thought about it when we didn't work this bill last year, but how do we eliminate the confusion? How do we make sure that those folks, because the second they walk in there, they are in violation of all sorts of laws, and you are not because you're from Wyoming, and they are because they have any one of our surrounding states permits.
Representative Harrelson.
Thank you very much, Chairman and Senator Craig. A good question. So there's 2 ways we could do this. One, if they have a state issued permit, they could legally do it if we changed the wording. They could legally do it. So that'd be a policy decision that I'm definitely not opposed to, But we kept it tighter for that reason. The other would have to be signage, where it stated that in the correctional, or in the K, not the correctional, but the K through 12, and this higher educational facilities, that there would be the requirement for a Wyoming state issued concealed carry permit. Now, let's say a student coming to our universities, they have the opportunity to go and apply for a Wyoming permit. That's in their purview. Now, if they already have a permit that is issued by another state that we recognize, legally, if we change that verbiage, we could do that. But that, again, is a policy decision that you guys as the body would have to make.
Committee, Senator Crum?
Yes, just kind of following up on Senator Craigle's question, Mr. Chairman, is what other states would have something similar to this? Do you know of any, or? Thank you.
Representative Haroldson?
Thank you very much, Chairman Olson and Senator Crum. Thank you for the answer. 12 states allow K through 12 access with concealed carry permit. 12 states allow university, 7 states K through 12. Kind of what this is mirrored after is Utah, and they've had it for almost 30 years. And have proven that out well. So, and there's, I mean, and I can get you guys that information of exactly which states, and I believe some of the people that are testifying online could give you that as well. Thank you.
Representative Haroldson, the penalty, the misdemeanor, $2,000 is a little unusual in our criminal code for a misdemeanor. Usually it's $1,000. $750 or $1,000 is what's really common. Why did you land on 2,000, or is that just, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, probably our good drafting staff landed on that. That wasn't something I asked for specifically. But this has also been legislation that's worked year after year for a long time, so maybe it
Just found its way in.
someone else at some other time placed that in there. I believe that if we need to bring that into a different number for alignment, I don't see that as an issue.
Okay. And then on page 6, I just want to make sure I'm understanding these statutes. You should have just rewrote the entire statute, because they're like, everything's written like in the reverse, so it becomes complicated to understand. But as far as the policy goes for K through 12 schools, you are allowing a school to prohibit its employees or staff and faculty from carrying, but obviously they can't impact the general public visiting the facility. Am I understanding that correctly?
So Mr. Chairman, how it would work is, so right now, currently, we've got a number of school districts. The number's changing. It was 3, and last year, halfway through, we gained a 4th, and I do believe we're at 5 right now, maybe 6 schools, districts out of the 38 school districts in the state. 38? Does that sound right? I might have. 48, thank you. Something didn't quite work in my brain there. Of those 48 school districts have adopted this policy where they've trained staff and armed staff for the purpose of security in schools. We didn't want to pull that rug out from underneath those schools that had made that decision, or schools that down the road want to make that decision of walking the teachers through that process. Now, with that being said, under this, the only place where there's any regulation is if they establish the policy, and then at that point, the regulation is on education, training, and the process. Now, if a school district, let's say that other 42, 43 school districts that have not made that decision, they cannot limit the staff's ability with a currently state issued concealed carry permit to be able to carry in those facilities. But one of the things too, I think we need to understand, and kind of just the schools in the state all have lockout capabilities. So really, and so this is just kind of something I want to bring up as a conversation piece, that as people have said, well, we're just going to randomly have people walk in Well, I mean, we decide who walks through the door of every school in this state, ultimately. Now, you will not, I mean, if they're concealed carrying, you won't know yes or no, but there is that point of that conversation, so.
Representative Hamilton, going back to a conversation that you started with me earlier about about security, how do you feel about security at our K through 12 schools? Do you think every K through 12 school should have an SRO?
Mr. Chairman, thank you for that question. So I think one of the issues that I have, as we've looked at schools and SROs, when you walk into a school and you see an SRO, what do you see? You see a law officer, you see a cop, basically. And the good side about that is you have an individual in there that's trained and capable of helping dissolve a situation, right? But let's take a step further. How many people have ever flown on a plane and seen an air marshal? Well, we don't. Why? Because we don't know who the air marshal is. The only time you've ever, in all my years of flying, I've seen one air marshal, and that one air marshal, the only reason I saw it was because someone decided to be a problem. Not a big problem, but a problem enough where an air marshal had to step in and do their job. At that point, it was like, oh, that flight, I knew there were two air marshals because they came out of the woodwork, right? The problem with SROs is they are the first target. Now, I'm not saying that we can't redesign how we do it. But at the end of the day, if you place someone into a situation and say an SRO, and let's say we put one in every single school, if someone wanted to create a problem, the first person you have to take out is the one that could take and create a problem for you. And so I think that's the concern that I have as we've looked at, do we put an armed SRO into a school? Well, if we do, then we better make them look like janitors. Or librarians or secretaries or something of that nature. Why? Because at that point, no one should know who that person is if we chose to do it that way. And that's what makes this program with our teachers so good, is because you don't know who's carrying in those schools. Honestly, I would love it if all schools had this opportunity to move forward with this opportunity of arming their teachers. But I think it's really important to understand an SRO design structure they have proven is not maybe as effective as we would hope, for the simple fact that, number one, usually they're stretched out very thin, and number two, they're also very easily identifiable.
The bill leaves in place the carve-outs for courtrooms. Can't conceal carry into a courtroom. But what about on a campus or in a school where there's an administrative proceeding taking place? In my mind, that's not a whole lot different than a courtroom. It's the same atmosphere. You just don't have an actual judge, but you still have the atmosphere of basically the accused working through a legal process. It can be contentious, it can be heated. Have you given any thought to carving out that type of exception in probably that's more applicable in our colleges and universities?
Chairman Olson, that actually was an amendment that came House side, and the conversation was had on the floor, and we did do back and forth on that. One of the conversations that we had, in a courtroom, you do have law enforcement presence as a whole, and also you have metal detector that you go through before entering into that courtroom. Now, at least that's what the testimony has been.
There are a lot of courtrooms without metal detectors in the state of Wyoming.
Sounds good. Well, I mean, then maybe we should
Only
have a
our
conversation about
larger,
that.
I would say probably only true in our larger municipalities like Casper and Cheyenne. But if you go to rural Wyoming, not only is there not a metal detector, there's not an officer in the courtroom.
Well, then maybe we need to do another carve out in the other direction. Because the point is this, if you don't have that protection point, so let's just say, and obviously we have the opportunity for judges to be armed, right? That's in current statute. But in the case of a school where there's something contentious, at the end of the day, if laws work to the extent of this logic, then when we say you can't speed, no one would ever speed. I mean, drugs have been illegal in this country for how long, and we have a drug epidemic. So the logic doesn't line up in the fact of, well, we're going to say no guns, Well, at that point, only the law-abiding citizens are gonna have no guns. And so that's the concern that I have in all of these situations. We can sit there and say, well, we want to protect that space. Okay, well, what's protecting that space? Is it a sign? Or is it a formidable force? And that's the question that we have to ask ourselves in the courtroom, at that proceeding at a school. I'm all for having the conversations, but at the end of the day, if all that's going to protect that room and that contentious situation is a sign, then I believe that we're right back at the very beginning of this conversation of do gun-free zones work, and the statistics prove that they don't. Because signs don't work. I mean, at the end of the day, we could want them to, and I wish they could, but human nature is very much involved in the situation.
Senator Crum?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a question on, and I like this section. I'm just trying to figure out what it really means. On page 6, line 9 to 13, it talks about the school. It says, may require any person carrying a firearm pursuant to this section to maintain the firearm on his person at all times or in a concealed biometric container or lockbox. And then my question is, within direct control of the person, how do you see what's direct control? Is that a box sitting right next to me? Is it a box down at the central office? That's my only question. What does direct control mean?
Representative Haroldson?
Thank you, Chairman Olson and Senator Crum. So that was language that was brought in and requested by our community colleges and our university. And the whole concept there is we don't want to lose common sense and intelligence here. So let's say we're in a situation where there could be someone in your dorm that has never handled a firearm, doesn't have any knowledge on a firearm, and you've got your firearm just sitting on the bedside stand, and they're like, that's cool, and want to play with it. Well, then someone gets shot accidentally because someone just doesn't have the knowledge. So the concept is, if it's not holstered and on your person, it needs to be in a locked position, in a locked location, a biometric, a lockable case. What we're trying to do is avoid accident-prone potential situations by giving them an opportunity. If it's not personally on you, if you're not carrying it in a holster, then it's not something that can just be, it's not sitting on the nightstand or on the coffee table or in the windowsill or something like that. It has to be in a lockable case in those situations.
So Representative Haroldson, that part of the statute only applies to a K through 12 school, but the example you gave is at a college or university. Would you support a carve out just like what you have there for a K through 12 school teacher or faculty or staff for universities and colleges, dormitories? Oh, maybe it's, what page is that?
I think it is, I think it's applicable to everything in that educational section. That's how we drafted it. Now, if for some reason we made a mistake, I'm all ears on a conversation or a correction, but I believe it's under the entire educational subsection.
Yeah, no, I think you're right.
Right.
Senator Crum, do you have a follow-up?
I think he's right.
Yeah. Okay.
Do you mind, if there's no more questions, could I explain the two amendments that I did bring and give you guys?
Yes.
Okay, so two concerns that were brought forward, and you'll hear testimony on one of them. The Airport Commission came to us and said, hey, we think we may have found a little bit of a loophole. We don't think we have statutory ability to tell someone they cannot carry a firearm onto a plane. And we're like, well, that would be problematic. And so before you, the proposed amendment on page 4, line 17, just inserts prohibiting the governing body of a public use airport or the governing body of the city, town, or county where a public use airport is located from restricting firearms within secured areas of a public use airport. So that was language brought to us by them to help fix that, and that would go into obviously that section not excluding.
Senator Craigo?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, so why is it problematic if they want to carry a gun onto a plane?
Well, that's a federal issue at that point.
Even if it stays within this constraints of our own state?
Representative Haroldson.
Thank you very much, Chairman. So this is applying to commercial flights in this. So this is not applying, as we've talked about it. Now, maybe we need to bring an amendment to the amendment to clarify that, and we can talk to them as they come forward with that. But this was to apply for commercial situations. So if you were to fly out of this airport here in this community and go on a commercial flight, going through security, they were concerned that they could not limit the ability to carry a firearm. Now, I don't believe this applies to your personal plane.
Senator Craigo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just looking at the language and it says public use airport and restricting within secured areas. And I guess that would apply after you go through security period, but, and not before. I'm just thinking about the circumstance where you might get on your own private plane.
That'd be a great question and a good catch, because we obviously, I mean, you got people that are doing predator control out of planes. You got all sorts of stuff that has to do with firearms and aircraft. But obviously, there's a big difference between that and getting on a commercial flight going to, say, Salt Lake City out of Cheyenne or something like that. So.
Okay, let's talk about the other amendment.
So the other one, a concern that came to us is current statute allows 18-year-olds to receive a concealed carry permit with a letter from the sheriff. Nowhere in the bill does it protect educational, K through 12 educational facilities from, let's say, a student that was enrolled in a high school that got a concealed carry permit to carry that concealed carry permit to their high school. And that was a concern that came to us on the House side, and we had discussions on it. And so this is a conversation that would make it where any 18-year-old, so it strikes 21 and puts 18. So this is a bit of a change in the statute, but what it also does is it aligns with the other portion that 18-year-olds with the letter from a sheriff. This would just take and do 18-year-olds, but it requires a GED or a high school diploma. So it would eliminate that issue of a student carrying in their school, and then at the same time have the conversation where it aligns the two statutes, because there's going to be the repealer in here as well as that correction or that change in the statute. So that's a policy decision, but it would address the issue that was brought on 18-year-olds carrying into high schools, but at the same time would also align those two statutes for 18-year-olds and concealed carries. So those are the two amendments I've brought.
Practically, it's how it's carried out in the real world is a little confusing to me. I mean, if you make the assumption that every student in the school obviously doesn't have their high school diploma or GED, then they can't carry. So if somebody came across someone who was carrying, they could question them and probably be in the right. Suppose there might be scenarios where somebody else comes into the building who's not 21, and then what do they do? Carry their diploma or GED on them, or what's the process look like?
Thank you very much, Chairman Olson, for that question. So this would be when they apply for their concealed carry permit, they would have, if they're under 21 years of age, they would have to produce a high school diploma or a GED to receive it. So that would be the nexus. So it isn't about whenever you're actually in the process of carrying, it's in the process of applying for.
Senator Craigo?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Representative Haroldson, I remember last year, and I remember we talked about this at length, and it may have even been a floor amendment when we worked this bill on the floor, but there was language in last year's version that essentially said you can't carry a concealed into any school, any high school K through 12 in which you are a student, or any other school for that matter, that, for example, the competitor's school, if we're talking sports or whatnot. Is there a reason you didn't include that language this year? Or I'm sure there is, but what is the reason? And then why this instead of that language, which in my mind is cleaner and easier to navigate for our folks? Even if you were gonna change the age to 18 for concealed carry, why not stick with that language?
Representative Haroldson?
Thank you, Chairman Olson and Senator Craigo. So the conversation, that was something that I wrestled with a lot, and as I had conversations with people around the state, people, even people in the governmental realm, the executive branch of our governmental realm, asking the question of what are rights and what do rights look like? And we have a student that, not a student, let's back up. Probably what really needs to be a conversation is when is a person an adult? Because the reality is at 18 years old, you can die for your country. At 18 years old, you're considered an adult in the legal world. If you were to step into a courtroom, I mean, even at 17 now anymore, I've seen where they've tried them as adults, 16s as adults if they do adult type action. But at 18, you are for sure an adult. You're not going to take an 18-year-old and charge them as a youth, maybe unless there's a mental capacity issue or something of that nature. But at the end of the day, an 18-year-old's an adult. And, but yet at the same time, 21 is kind of an adult when it comes to smoking cigarettes, drinking some alcohol, or getting a concealed carry permit. Well, there was obviously a carve out for 18-year-olds, and so that's in there for, say, a kid that's out of high school that gets a job as a law officer, works that road, and they're not at 21. So that's a conversation there. So there's just these options. Well, as we looked at that and said, okay, well, as an 18-year-old, if you're an adult, we can say you can go get your concealed carry permit. You can get that through your sheriff's department. There are cases in Wyoming where this is being used as far as 18-year-olds with concealed carry permits. And we can say, well, you've got the rights, but now we're going to exclude those rights in your schools. Even though if you were 2 years older, you could do it, or next year you could do it. And so that was the nexus of just what's the rights conversation. And why I went this route is we're giving them that right, but at the same time, we are requiring documentation that they've already completed high school education. And so we protect the school realm, but at the same time, preserve the rights. And that was just the conversation moving forward as we thought about this.
All right. I think that wraps up. That's all you have for amendments, right? Just those two?
Yep.
Okay. We'll move into public comment. Unless you had something, Senator Steinmetz. I'm assuming you're just prepping for the floor presentation.
Mr. Chairman, I am, and I won't take much of your time, but I did just want to support the bill, but also say, you know, I come from a simpler time. Some of us with gray hair in this room do, where after we took a couple bales of hay to the horses in our 1975 Chevy pickup, we looked for a deer on the way to school and had our rifle in the back on our little gun rest. But that's not the days we live in now. And then when my daughter was in high school, we had the Columbine shootings. And now I have 2 grandkids that are in remote schools in Goshen County that we can't afford SROs for them. We have one that travels around to some of the smaller schools and some of the little towns that we have. You know, we're lucky to even have a police officer in the town. And so our friends and neighbors who are law-abiding citizens and good folks that want to protect our kids, we just need to provide a way for them and staff to do that, which I know we passed a law several years ago to help with that. But, and you know, girls going to college and on college campuses, it's just very important that we address this issue in the state of Wyoming for all of our families and kids that are concerned with what could happen if our schools are a soft target.
Thank you, Senator. Any questions? All right, thank you. Let's move. We're gonna do agency testimony first. So we'll start with the Department of Education. University of Wyoming, you can come on up. And yeah, community college, come on up. All right. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee members. Dickie Shaner here, speaking on behalf of State Superintendent Megan Degenfelder. She is a vocal advocate of the Second Amendment, and has been working hard in her role in the State Building Commission to advance an effort very similar to this with state buildings, the Capitol building, and believes that this bill continues to move that discussion further. The one thing she wanted me to bring up today is related to the prevention and protection discussion that you just had with the bringer of the bill. And she believes that a school district should be given a choice in this matter, in the sense that either allow the concealed carry as it is in the bill, or a choice to provide the legitimate security that's needed to keep the individuals in that school protected. There was discussion of a courtroom or other types of facilities, but that prevention and protection piece, if a school district can legitimately provide that and makes the decision to do that, that she believes they should be given that opportunity to choose either or. And so with that being said, there are a lot of logistical challenges and practical issues if the district chose to go for the prevention and protection option and put in metal detectors and have armed security available. And hope that if that is something this committee entertains, that we would have a discussion about how to provide them with resources and the ability to go that route. So with that, Mr. Chairman, that's concludes my remarks.
Questions for Mr. Shaner? All right, thank you. Who's next?
Mr. Chairman, Mike Smith with the University of Wyoming. Before I get into some prepared remarks, just a couple comments on some questions. Mr. Chairman, I believe there was a discussion with Senator Crago on page 2, that's subsection C on lines 20 to 22, talking about the Wyoming permit versus any permit. And the bill sponsor kind of addressed this, but just to be clear, that language about a Wyoming permit is required by the Federal Gun-Free School Zone Act of 1990. That language in that federal act is very clear that it's illegal for an individual to possess a firearm within a distance of 1,000 feet of an elementary or secondary school unless that individual possesses a permit from that state where they're at. And that's, I believe, why that language is structured the way it is in this bill. And then there was discussion about control of the firearm in a container, and does it apply to the university in college setting versus K-12 on page 4, lines 19 through 22 is the section that's most directly impactful to the university and the colleges, where nothing prohibits those entities from requiring a student or employee to store firearms within that concealed container or locked container. We can't prohibit the storage in a dorm, but we can require that it must be that way. And so anyway, I just wanted to point those out. Sorry, I'll try to shorten what I've got here and just say, really what I wanted you all to be reminded of or understand or know for the first time is that the University of Wyoming Board of Trustees walked this walk, went through this process that you're going through over the last year. We began studying this issue while you all were, at least the legislature last year was passing a similar bill. And then in the governor's veto, he encouraged entities like the colleges and the university to exercise that local control and study this issue and debate it and make a policy, and we did that. We drafted a proposed rule change to allow concealed carry. We invested months into the process of engaging our community. We conducted a survey of that campus community and interested stakeholders, and we held 2 public forums with the help of the Wyoming Firearms Research Center at the College of Law, and the trustees took public comment. In the end, they defeated that proposal 6-5. And so it was, not the final result that this bill would bring, but we think that process of local control worked. And we learned a lot about how to structure an approach that, if adopted, could work best for our campus and our people. And some of that knowledge is kind of duplicated in this legislation. We appreciate the limited exceptions for state agency-operated health and human services settings, for labs and facilities where explosive materials are present, and the treatment of open carry that Representative Haroldson discussed. We would encourage a slight limited expansion of the existing exception on page 4, line 5, applying currently to health and human services facilities licensed by the Department of Family Services. We'd like that to include license exempt facilities such as our on-campus child care facility, which is accredited, but it's exempt from that licensing process because it's a state agency operated center. Additional exemptions that we included, that was included in the policy considered by the trustees, exempted all athletic events, not just those where alcohol was sold. We exempted residence halls where you may have that living situation where one roommate carries and the other roommate's never seen a firearm or understands how to handle them. And as well as the half-acre recreation and wellness center. So just in closing, again, we'd prefer to see this policy made at the local level, but should the bill move forward, as it appears it will, we encourage you to include some limited exception areas to help us implement this change in as smooth and practical a way as possible. And I just want to thank the House sponsor for the open dialogue and thank you all, and would stand for any questions.
Questions from Mr. Smith? All right, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, good afternoon. My name is Erin Taylor. I represent the Wyoming Association of Community College Trustees. The Trustees Association is made up of the 56 trustees. Did we earn a few more? Of all 8 community colleges. The presidents of the colleges are ex officio members of the board. And with me today, I do have Dr. Joe Schaefer, who is the president right here in Cheyenne of Laramie County Community College. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I thought I would just briefly walk the committee through the process. The colleges didn't have as much of a public process that you heard from our friends at the university, but all 8 of the community colleges have had this conversation, and in different ways. Some of them did surveys on their campuses, having conversations with staff, child care centers, the different types of facilities that are offered on their campuses. But by and large, we have so much appreciated the ability to have the conversation with the sponsor, working with our friends at the university, the governor's office, and we've been working on this for months. And so I'm not going to repeat the areas that you heard from that were of concern from the university, because the colleges do echo that as well. And we appreciate the fact that on the other side of the building, that many of those exceptions were given consideration. And we would definitely support some further consideration in this conversation here today. But what I thought I would highlight really quickly before Dr. Schaefer gives you a few remarks, because I think it's good for you to hear the experience of his college and the impact on his students and the community right here on the ground. To go with the words you heard from the Department of Education, prevention and protection, the colleges had that conversation. What can they offer in terms of prevention if there are exception areas? And so, as you know, the colleges are different sizes and have different resources. And so we did do a tally, if you will, of the available resources at each of the community colleges. And if you're interested in that information, Mr. Chairman, I can get that information to you. But as you might imagine, it's all across the board. You don't walk through a metal detector at any of the community colleges. Some of them have resource officers on campus with different levels of ability, and Dr. Schaefer can talk more about that, but it's all over the board. So we also did do a tally of what are the resources that are required, and that's a conversation that's paralleled this conversation in front of your body for many years when we've seen a bill to remove the gun-free zones. And even the Community College Commission a few years ago made a request for safety and security in terms of resources. So I just wanted to make you aware that we are still doing that research, trying to keep it up to date, and we have it all available to you should you request it. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I would turn it over to Dr. Schaefer for a few words.
Okay, Dr. Schaefer.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Joe Schaefer, I'm the president of Laramie County Community College. Thanks for the time and for continuing this conversation. Like my good colleague from the University of Wyoming, we would prefer these decisions happened closest to the people by the boards of trustees. So I can't stand in support of the bill. I don't know that I believe that there's strong evidence to suggest that concealed carry on our campuses is going to make us safer, nor can I look you in the eye and tell you that it's going to make us any less safe with that. What this conversation really seems to be about is really about a constitutional right. And I think that's fair to have that conversation and discuss what, if any, limits are placed on those constitutional rights in these settings. And there seems to be considerable will within the body to pass this legislation, and we recognize that. And to that end, I want to echo what was shared about Representative Haraldson and the good folks bringing this bill. I want to just laud the fact that there was good, open, civil discourse, objectivity, and a willingness to really consider different perspectives. And so I would just say for Representative Haraldson, if we could all embrace that type of approach when we engage in topics that we aren't necessarily aligned on, I think we would find some of this common ground. And maybe that's what's represented within the bill here. There are two things that I would ask you to consider. The first one is just echoing what Mr. Smith mentioned regarding the Health and Human Services facilities. Like University of Wyoming, we have a nationally accredited early childhood center on our campus. It is not licensed by DFS. It's exempt according to DFS statutes. We follow all their things. And so we would like that language in that section to include licensed or exempt from DFS specifically. And then, Mr. Chairman, to your point, I'd just like to reiterate, we had this conversation when it was in the other chamber. We do have administrative procedures that align with our employee conduct and discipline actions, and those have very structured due process. They can be emotionally charged, and believe that those should be another area that would be exempt from concealed carry for anyone in that room. And so with that, Mr. Chairman, I know there's a lot of people who want to share comments. Thank you for taking the time to hear from us. I'm happy to stand for any questions you might have.
Any questions for Ms. Taylor or Dr. Schaefer? All right, thank you. Thanks, everyone. Other agencies wishing to testify on this bill? Any other state agencies wishing to testify on this bill? No? The Department of Corrections is just here because there was nothing else to do over the noon hour? All right. Okay. Well, with that, I'll go ahead and open up general public comment. We'll just start over here on my left and go down if you don't mind. Yep, we'll start with you. Is your mic on? There'd be a little green light.
Okay, I think it's on now. Thank you. My name is Ariel Coleman. I'm a student at the University of Wyoming majoring in political science and missing several classes to speak here before you today. I'm here before you to urge you to vote no on this bill. First, I want to point out that the Wyoming Department of Health states that Wyoming's rate of suicide is double that of the national average and the highest rate per capita in the nation. Again, furthermore, there were 2 reported suicides in the dorms this very school year, and an increase in access to guns in dorms, plus all on-campus housing, would increase the amount of suicides overall. Furthermore, Wyoming's rate of suicide is more than double that of the national average and the highest rate per capita in the nation, again, according to the Wyoming Department of Health. And I also want to add a quote onto this from the Harvard study saying that studies show that most attempters act on impulse in moments of panic or despair. Once the acute feelings ease, 90% do not go on to die by suicide, but few can survive the gun blast. And so this gun would make this really permanent, as in there's no chance for survival, as it's an immediate instant blast, and there's no way to go back. And that's what making this bill pass really dangerous, especially for campuses specifically. And moving on to another quote, Rather than deterring gun violence, the most recent and most rigorous research on right to carry laws suggests that the laws are associated with increased violence with guns, says John Donahue, a law professor at Stanford. In 2016, a permit-holding student in Texas unintentionally discharged his gun in his dorm room just weeks after a guns on campus law went into effect. In 2017, a Utah student with a concealed carry permit reached into his backpack and unintentionally fired his gun in a campus cafeteria, hitting a table and light fixture. It was the second incident of unintentional gunfire on the campus in 2 years. In 2019, a Georgia student unintentionally shot and wounded himself in a campus lounge. Seeing that these accidental firings are happening with permit-holding students is the very reason we cannot pass this bill, especially when we're focusing specifically on universities and the campus and the impacts that would have. To conclude, voting no on this bill means we have the chance to save innocent lives. Thank you, Chair and distinguished members of the committee, for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Coleman. Next.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Sophia Gomelski. I'm a student at the university as well. I'm listening to the same classes as Ariel over here to be here and urge you to vote no on House Bill 172. I'm urging you to vote no because I think that this bill fundamentally undermines the autonomy of local governments and educational institutions across our state. Last March, I joined people to fill a chamber with moms, students, educators, to voice our concerns, and we waited for hours for a chance to speak against this same bill. We stayed well past 10 p.m., and the bill failed in committee that night. It was then brought back through unprecedented rule changes, but it was ultimately vetoed by the governor. In September, the Joint Judiciary Committee, there was a superintendent and a teacher from Washakie County School District that drove 10 hours or 5 hours each way to speak in opposition of this legislation at that meeting. They're one of only school districts in the state that do allow teachers to concealed carry, and they said that their program works for them. They do not want to lose their local control, and they said that students are not comfortable with allowing members of the public to carry into their facilities. In August, the University of Wyoming solicited public feedback through an online survey that attracted more than 3,000 responses. 64% of our campus did not want guns allowed on our campus or any changes to our current policy. In November, the university trustees voted against allowing concealed carry on campus. I've listened to or attended every single conversation and meeting on this subject that the legislature has had for the past couple years. I've done the same for over a dozen conversations at the university, ranging from students to athletes to law enforcement, our firearms research center, faculty, the university board of trustees, and I've learned about the necessity of creating certain spaces and allowing certain spaces on our campus to be gun-free zones. I ask at the very least that you seriously consider adopting amendments for these kinds of spaces, including dormitories, athletics and workout facilities, labs, counseling centers, childcare centers, and disciplinary meetings and more. Though I do think that requiring an officer at a disciplinary meeting could be a good idea for the university to consider moving forward. It's important to add that avoiding accident-prone situations in the way that the bringer of the bill intends is simply unenforceable. There's no way to ensure somebody is storing their firearm properly in these spaces the same way that we cannot do that in spaces that aren't currently protected. That's just reality. Last month, during the House Judiciary Committee, only 30 minutes were given to members of the public to speak about this bill. Only 4 people spoke in favor, including an out-of-state lobbyist and an out-of-state citizen. 14 Wyomingites spoke in opposition to this bill, with at least 20 more waiting to speak but didn't get a chance to due to time constraints. The people that spoke in opposition included parents, educators, current school board members, sheriffs from our county, a school superintendent surrounded by staff and board members, the government relations director from the Wyoming Education Association, the director of the Wyoming Association of Sheriffs and Chiefs of Police, and the Wyoming Association of Municipalities nonprofit representative. This legislation fails to reckon with a very simple fact, which is that schools and our educational institutions are for students. These are our spaces, and it is our right to feel safe in these spaces that were created for us. We are not anti-gun. We're anti-stripping local control. Students in this state are in favor of smart local solutions. In the most respectful way possible, I urge you to consider the legitimate and factual concerns of students, educators, and families across the state over the emotional appeals and fear-mongering of gun lobbyist groups. There is a reason that this bill has failed in the past, and it has changed little to none since then. Please don't tread on us and vote no on this bill. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Next.
Hey, how we doing, gentlemen? My name's Ven Meester. I wear an awful lot of hats, including I'm the editor-in-chief of the Branding Iron. All those talks and webinars and town halls about the bill over at the Board of Trustees. I was on those with the president and the vice president, chief of police. So I've kind of got my finger on the pulse as far as this stuff goes. You know, past few years, we've seen these bills go in circles as far as all the guns and such. And, you know, you're going to hear a lot of students. You've heard a lot of students over the years say, you know, we don't want this bill, right? And it's you know, it's clear to students as a representative of them, it's clear to you guys that that's not what's going to happen. The bill's not just going to fail forever and go away. Guns are very important to the state of Wyoming. Firearms and protecting ourselves is a fundamental right of American citizens. So I'm not coming here today to tell you vote against the bill. It's a terrible bill, because I don't think it is. Honestly, I think we've gotten to a pretty good place. What I am asking is just a few amendments. I'm asking for dorms, because really, other than Utah, pretty much every other university, you've got 11 other universities, 10 of which ban them in dorms, because realistically, personal protection isn't really a factor in dormitories due to locked doors. Only person you're protecting yourself from is your roommate. I'm asking for workout facilities, because workout facilities is a standard, institutional standard in really every other university that has concealed carry permits. And then, you know, Kansas, with their athletic events, does anything over 5,000. Is just you ban concealed carry. There's too much going on, too many people, even without the alcohol. Gentlemen, you were in college, you've seen athletic events. You don't want guns around, right? You've got protection, you've got the resource officers. You don't want people concealed carrying at really any type of athletic event. It's just not safe. And so I'm coming here today as somebody who's been a part of these conversations, who's been the student representative, who represents the student opinion, telling you that, you know, you've heard from the 64% of students that are against these gun bills. You've heard from the 6 members of the Board of Trustees. But I think in order to appease those people and also appease the 5 Board of Trustees members that support it and the roughly 35–40% of students that support these bills, we need to put some amendments in there and get this bill finally passed, ready to keep students safe, keep them protected with those amendments for the dorms and athletic facilities so that everybody can be happy, and this ring around, this year after year after year of arguing and villainizing can just end, and we can come to a place that we're all happy with as Wyomingites who have the right to protect ourselves, but also Wyomingites who have rights as students and rights as people. Thank you, gentlemen.
Next.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, members of the committee. My name is Nathan Hamilton. I am a sophomore at the University of Wyoming. I'd also like to say I am a lifelong Wyoming resident, and I do staunchly support the Second Amendment. And so I understand why, at a constitutional and at a personal level, this conversation is being had, and I respect it. I actually plan on getting my concealed carry license once I turn 21. I would like to practice my Second Amendment rights myself. However, I would like to say that I am firmly against this bill and do hope that this gets stricken down, because I believe that the conversation on this bill, centered around constitutional rights, does not actually serve me or expand my liberties. In fact, I feel that my liberties are more threatened in a world where this bill is law, and I am by no means alone. As my colleagues have stated already, 64% of the student base and a significant amount of the faculty of the University of Wyoming have voted against this, and this is obviously echoed in K-12 education as well. The response was overwhelmingly negative from the teachers who watch over our children, the children themselves, and of their parents. The priority in this scenario isn't the full scope of constitutional freedom, but of public safety. So I ask, who does this bill serve? If the people using schools and other gun-free zones protest that they feel less safe, then who stands to benefit from it? It is not a great stretch of the imagination to imagine the things that may come as a consequence of this legislation. I had a conversation with a beloved teacher of mine, and they pointed out some very obvious scenarios. For example, in 2012, Jim Crum, a professor at Casper College, was murdered by his own son during his own lecture. His son shot him with a bow and arrow because he could not buy a gun for mental health reasons, let alone bring one onto Casper College's campus. After attacking his father, the two fought for minutes, allowing for 6 students to escape the room for safety. Now imagine if he had a firearm. The conversation would probably be much different. There would probably be much higher of a body count than there was that day. And I think that that is something that should be considered. There have been other instances. Just this week, 3 children were killed in Byron, Wyoming, due to irresponsible gun ownership and mental health issues. In my time living in the dorms, this school year, 2 students have committed suicide. There is a cross in Washakie Green right now. Giving students and giving faculty more access to firearms, the only way I could possibly see this going is these numbers continue to increase and things continue to get more dangerous. And in regards to the response to the possible dangers of this, we talk about more SROs or potentially undercover SROs. Have we fully considered the implications of this? The responsibilities, walking into a school knowing that anybody could have a weapon, but that you actually have no guarantee, especially for someone who's under 18. A kindergartner has no ability to defend themselves, but they're going to rely on either their teachers or someone who they don't know, an SRO, to protect them for them. To me, it seems irrational. I hope at the very least that we can introduce amendments to have certain protected spaces, but I do hope that this bill is stricken down. Thank you all.
Thank you, Mr. Hamilton. All right. We'll fill up the chairs with some more testimony. All right, welcome. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Olson, for listening to us and committee members. My name is Barb Cook. I'm a retired educator of 21 years, a current school board trustee. However, I'm speaking about my own personal feelings today. I'm here to testify in opposition to House Bill 172. Due to my previous profession, my past volunteer work in schools, and conversation with my children and teacher friends, I will speak today about what I know. I am totally aware of the activities, both positive and negative, that go on inside classroom walls. We have amazing students and parents and school staff that are doing outstanding things. However, there are also challenging students and parents that exhibit inappropriate behavior that can pose a risk to other classmates and school personnel. If any of these people had the ability to carry a gun with them in school, I can only imagine the outcome of this scenario. I scoured numerous sources looking for statistics that would support that a concealed carry would make schools safer, and I found none. The opposite is true. Concealed carry increases the homicide rate and does not work as an effective deterrent to crime, only bringing more pain to communities. I heard a state senator last year talk about what he was in. He was in a community college. He did not have his concealed carry. There was an active shooter, and he felt like he couldn't have made a difference had he had his concealed carry weapon with him. It all happened too quickly. If you are, in fact, against government overreach, please don't reach into our community lives. With the exception of Chairman Olson, I have been elected by the citizens of Laramie County to make decisions about schools. So please allow us to make the decision for these schools. Today, I will have been in 3 different schools. I have talked to principals. They do not want concealed carry in their buildings. But yet, people that have not been in schools, such as you, are looking into a bill that would truly affect teachers and administrators, and they're the ones that do not want this. I believe that we all want to make sure our schools are safe environments for learning, but House Bill 172 will not bring us closer to that goal. It's important that potential disagreements can be solved peacefully and without risk of escalation. Schools must be safe havens for learning, and one of my most important jobs as an educator was to keep kids safe. House Bill 172 would put students and teachers in harm's way, and as an educator, a mom of 2 school district employees, and a grandma of 3 students, I want gun-free zones to remain intact. Guns have no place in school, and I would hope that you will defeat this bill. Thank you.
Any questions from Mrs. Cook? All right, thank you. Next.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Olson and fellow senators. My name is Nathan Corley, and I am a freshman at the University of Wyoming. It is an honor today to discuss House Bill 172 with all of you. In fact, I wish that more of my colleagues were here beside me to discuss this bill. Unfortunately, this hearing was scheduled at a time where most students would be in class and could not make the trip to Cheyenne to speak their minds on this topic. This is no way to go about passing legislation. I personally am pro-Second Amendment. However, House Bill 172 is not a pro-gun amendment. If it were, I would be in class just like many of my colleagues who couldn't make it here today. House Bill 172 goes beyond this. This bill actively seeks out an unsafe environment in our schools. Do not get me wrong, I understand the importance of defending our classrooms. In recent years, school shootings have become a regularity throughout our country. But do we really think that this is the best way to go about that? This legislation being proposed today would allow school shooters to get closer than ever to their goals without detection. As said earlier, even though schools have lockout abilities, they would not be able to easily identify a threat from a non-threat. So up to now, we have established that this bill does not defend classrooms. Does it help students in any way? No. Rather, such legislation will distract students and take away from their learning. It discourages freedom of speech. Students will be worried to speak their minds without life-lasting repercussions. Here's the reality of this bill. It is not pro-Second Amendment. It is not pro-gun. It is not even pro-freedom. Our children and our grandchildren will not be any safer with this or smarter with this bill. There is little practical application of this bill, and we must consider amendments now, because as House Bill 172 stands at the moment, it is simply anti-life. Thank you.
Next.
Thank you, yo. I'll be frank. I'll be brief.
Start with your name.
Yeah, Rafael Villa. My name is Rafael Villa. I'm a freshman at the University of Wyoming. I'm living on the dorms, which I think will be a crucial part for what I'm about to say. I'm just gonna urge you to vote no on this bill. Like I said, I'll be frank, I'll be brief. I don't know if I'd feel comfortable on a campus with where anybody that is in SRO has access to a weapon that is concealed or whatever, right? A lot of the time, disputes can be handled with words. A lot of irrationality is really, I don't know. These issues are blown up out of proportion when dealing with this kind of legislation. Conflicts are made out to be way more excessive than they really are. But regardless, I don't know if I'd want to be living on a dorm campus with somebody that has access to a firearm and is 18 years old. As you guys know, it's pretty well established. The human brain matures fully at 25 years old, right? Before then, a lot of irrational and pointless decisions are made. As I'm sure you guys remember from when you were, under the age of 25, you were making some pretty silly decisions, I'm sure. And I believe letting people who don't have fully developed brains get access to their firearms like that have access to firearms like that can be a pretty bad idea. As brought up by one of my colleagues before, the dorms are pretty safe. Doors are usually locked, right? The RAs are very good at asking anybody who doesn't look like a student or doesn't look like they live in the dorms, to, seat themselves in front of RA vision in order to make sure that they don't go up into the dorms and make a ruckus, right? Again, I mentioned that I live on the dorms. I actually had the opportunity to be in one of the dorm rooms wherein somebody killed themselves. I don't mean to be, gross about it, but you could still see blood splatters on the ceiling and whatnot. This is a very real issue, right? It's been brought up 2 or 3 times, but I've seen it. I've seen the aftermath of these kinds of things, right? You can't really paint over blood splatters like that. Maybe you can, but I like to believe that that blood splatter was left there for one reason or another, right? These are young kids who are stressed. I mean, let's assume here, right? This bill does go through, and people under the age of 18, under the age of 25, happen to get their guns or whatever, right? Their concealed carry permits. Maybe they have a bad week, right? I know I've had a couple bad weeks, and there are points where you are so under the sun, under the clouds or whatever, right? You don't see a way out, and then you end up you end up making a really irrational decision, and I don't know. I don't think it would be a good idea to let 18-year-olds have guns like that. I don't know. I think it's not a good idea. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Mr. Winnie?
Mr. Chairman, Bill Winnie. Excuse me. I support the bill. I have the unique experience of having walked through a nuclear weapons-free zone to be interviewed by the Assistant to the Secretary of Defense for Atomic Energy, the head of the DoD Nuclear Weapons Program. Now, I didn't see any nuclear weapons hanging around, but I got to remark, the miniaturization process is real. There might have been a backpack there. Tongue in cheek, please. What you're attempting to do here is with this bill is to balance the Second Amendment rights versus the authority of the government. And so are carve-outs appropriate? Yeah, I got it. But that's a tough choice, but I think this bill fairly well walks that line. Separately, I would ask you to separate out veteran suicide from the rest of the suicide in the state. That is typically an issue of veterans making the transition into the civilian world, which I have found to be an interesting transition. Subject to questions, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Winnie. Next.
We might need to start leasing those. Yeah, charge. Start bidding those seats out.
Start over here on the left.
Budget.
Chair Olson and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify. I am Beth Howard, a longtime resident of Cheyenne, a mother and a grandmother, and I am here to voice my opposition to House Bill 172. I am testifying on my own behalf. House Bill 172 poses a real threat to children and adults, as the existing Wyoming concealed carry permit is woefully inadequate. It does not protect Wyoming citizens from people who have been adjudicated and involuntarily committed to a mental health institution. Those individuals are prohibited under federal law from owning a firearm. Wyoming is one of only a few states that seals its mental health records and does not report adjudicated involuntary commitment data to the National Instant Criminal Background Check System. This dangerous omission allows people who are prohibited by federal law from owning firearms to purchase them in Wyoming and to obtain a concealed carry permit, as a background check will not reveal the information. Before expanding any firearms law, this omission must be corrected to keep guns out of the hands of people who should not have them, to protect the safety of all Wyoming citizens. Since this legislative session started, at least 11 people have been shot in Wyoming. None of those shootings have been between strangers, and 0 have been in gun-free zones. This is a startling statistic, and we should all be alarmed. It is often said, it's not a gun problem, it's a mental health problem. Unfortunately, in Wyoming, it is both. The recent murder-suicide in Byron is all the evidence we need of this. Wyoming ranks #1 for suicide per capita in the nation, and we must do all that we can to prevent such tragedies from happening again. Let's protect our already safe, sensitive areas and keep them that way by maintaining local control, while entrusting safety to teachers, administrators, public officials, and law enforcement officers who already do an excellent job. Firearms do not belong in sensitive areas such as schools, public meetings, and government buildings. There are many ways to better protect Wyoming citizens, but this bill is not one of them. I urge you to vote no on House Bill 172.
Any questions, committee? Thank you, Ms. Howard. Next.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, committee. My name is Mark Jones. I'm a national director with Gun Owners of America, one of those dreaded lobbyists you heard about earlier. But I happen to live in Johnson County, Wyoming, where I reside with my wife and 2 children, and I'm a taxpayer. And I represent the carpenters and the truck drivers and the shopkeepers and the ranchers and the loggers that can't be here today because they're at work and make the economy in Wyoming move. They pay the taxes to turn the lights on in these schools and universities. So I'm here to represent them today. 83% of the legislature voted for this bill last year, people who were elected by the people of Wyoming. I hear a lot of talk today from unelected people about what should be. This is the 4th year we've worked on this with Representative Harrelson. There is a lot of emotion behind this topic. There's a lot of misinformation. The bottom line is that all the statistics that are available, and I think you have people online, probably John Lott's probably online, and he knows a lot more about this than I do. All the statistics point to the fact that gun-free zones are killing zones. 94% of mass shootings in the United States occur in gun-free zones. This is an emotional issue where people are scared of guns. Making places off limits to guns does not stop criminals. And the illusion's been given that this is something new. Many states and many colleges and universities across America have these policies already and have for decades. There has not been an epidemic of violence in these areas. In fact, the opposite. There has never been a mass shooting in a place where citizens can legally carry concealed weapons. The facts don't speak to some of the emotion you're hearing today. I've also heard this idea of local control, local control, local control. There is no local control of constitutional rights, senators. Local control of constitutional rights gave us COVID mandates that shut down certain communities and certain businesses in certain areas while others were allowed to go on. Local control of constitutional rights gave us Jim Crow voting laws in the South in the 1960s, where black people couldn't vote in parts of Alabama. That's what local control of constitutional rights gives us. That's a very slippery slope. Unelected bureaucrats have no right to make these decisions. 83% of this legislature voted for this bill last year. You guys were the ones elected by the people of Wyoming. This isn't new, as I've said. Many colleges across this country in blue states allow this and have for decades. Many states, as Representative Harrelson has already testified, already allow this. I won't speak to the statistics because they're readily available. I've spoke to them for 4 years. But I have one final thing to say on the behalf of my members and supporters, the people who can't be here today because they're working so that you guys can be here, so that those lights can be on at that university. Their constitutional rights don't stop because of emotion or fear. We have a right to protect ourselves. I have a right to carry my firearm to protect my 2 children in Johnson County. So I'll stand for questions, and I thank you for your time.
Any questions from Mr. Jones? Thank you. Next.
Hello, Chairman Olson and the committee. My name is Rebecca Bexdale, and I live in Jackson, Teton County. My testimony will be brief. I don't think that having a gun in my purse makes me any more susceptible to committing suicide than having 2 fists that I can ball up at the end of my hands doesn't make me hit someone. My grandfather in Alabama killed himself, and my grandmother was about to die, and they had been married about 70 years, and he just didn't want to outlive her, I guess. But I don't blame the gun. He just decided that he was going to kill himself, and he would have used whatever means necessary. To push back a little bit on the previous testimony, when I attended the University of Alabama, I had a stalker that would, he must have not had a job, he would just follow me around campus for months and would threaten to kill himself if I wouldn't talk to him. And I was not allowed to have a gun to protect myself. So I feel like when we go into gun-free zones, we're just sitting ducks because the criminals are going to have guns and I won't have a way to defend myself. So please consider repealing some of these gun-free zones. Thank you. I'll stand for questions.
Thank you. Any questions from Ms. Bextel? All right. Thank you for your testimony. Next.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Greg Hunter and I'm from Laramie. I sent you a lot of emails on this issue.
We got your
Great.
I believe
Pull
it's
up that
over-
one on serial killers.
I believe it's over 200 pages of documentation. We appreciate
Absolutely,
that.
absolutely. I spent a great deal of time studying crime, and it's clear that the underlying premise that was championed with this bill is junk science. More guns did not reduce crime. While it's true the world and humans have gotten better since 1990, it is also clear that it had nothing to do with more guns. In fact, since 1990, teen pregnancy, 15 to 19, Rates have plummeted from 62 per thousand to 13.5 per thousand. The drop in pregnancy rates had nothing to do with guns. In fact, since 1990, the first use of illicit drugs and drinking by children has gone up in age, and the overall illicit drug use is down since 1990. More guns did not do that. In fact, there is only one causal agent that can account for the world getting better, and that is the reduction of lead exposure in society. In fact, the rise and fall of serial killers in American society can be correlated with the rise and fall of lead pumped into society. That's right. Stop pumping lead, they all retire and go home. So when the proponents of this bill cite John Locke's work or any citation from crimesresearch.org, they are basing their claims on junk science. In fact, with the passage of this bill, the individuals more likely to use illicit drugs, become serial killers, become sexual deviants, or in general are erratic, are the most exposed to lead all through their lives. So if parents are taking their child to the gun range in order to make them good citizens, they are really potentially producing the people they most fear: violent, murderous sex offenders. Kill this bill, as it should not be foisted on the Wyoming public. Thank you for your time, and I will entertain any questions on the 230 pages I sent.
All right. Any questions from Mr. Hunter? We're still digesting the 200 pages. So
Okay.
actually, what I'm going to do, I believe we have an airport manager here. Are you the airport manager? Okay, perfect. Because we have an amendment dealing with airports, I definitely want to hear from you. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Devin Brubaker. I'm the Airport Director for the Southwest Wyoming Regional Airport and the President of the Wyoming Airports Coalition. We'll bring the temperature down a little bit here. We neither stand for or oppose to this bill. We appreciate Representative Haroldson taking the time to work with us on an amendment. Heard some questions earlier from Senator Crago that are very valid questions, and I'd like to address those if I can. At our commercial service airports in Wyoming, and even our public use airports, we have defined security areas defined by federal law. If you think about a large event, say Super Bowl or anything, they have different security zones. The further you work out from the critical area, the less restrictive they are. So at airports, we have the airport operations area, which is largely everything inside the fence. Then you have the security identification display area, which is a little bit smaller of an area where you have to have an ID to be. Then you get a little bit closer to the commercial airline terminal. That is called the secured area. And then the very closest you get is inside where TSA screens passengers, and that's called the sterile area. What this amendment does is before you says specifically that we want to be able to restrict firearms within the secured area. And secured area is defined by federal law as a portion of an airport specified in an airport security program in which certain security measures specified in Title 49 of the Code of Federal Regulations are carried out. This area is where aircraft operators that have a security program under federal law in-plane and deplane passengers and sort and load baggage and any adjacent areas that are not separated by adequate security systems, measures, or procedures. In short, what that means is we're not really focused on the passenger aspect. TSA takes care of the passenger aspect. You can't carry your gun through the checkpoint when you go fly commercially. What we're worried about is the airline employees, the airport employees, the concessions employees, other employees that have access to the secured area, which is slightly larger than the sterile area that TSA controls. What we also are focused on is we do tours at our airports. We have community groups that come up and do tours. And if you have a friend or family that works at an airport, you can have friend or family come visit you at work as long as they're under proper escort. So what we're simply asking for with our amendment is to allow the governing bodies responsible for these airports to be able to restrict guns in the secured area. Once again, that is defined by federal law. It's a very small area of an airport, not the smallest. It's the second smallest area of the airport. To improve the bill or the amendment, appreciate the comments from Senator Crago. If we wanted to swap public use, the words public use throughout the amendment with commercial service airport, that could help, I think, address some of your questions, Senator Crago, and that would be a friendly amendment for us to that. It doesn't impact general aviation. It doesn't impact predator control. It doesn't impact no matter what you do, if even with this amendment here, as it's worded with public use, it doesn't impact any of those general aviators, predator control, any of that. It's simply that area right around the commercial airline terminal where the highest security levels are at an airport. With that, Mr. Chairman, happy to answer any questions.
Senator Kolb?
Thank you, Chairman. Well, Devin, be more specific at the airport in Rock Springs, because that's the one I think I can understand best. Where are you talking about? Where is the defined areas? Can you kind of give me an idea? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Absolutely. Mr. Chairman, Senator Kolb, excellent question. And for the two of you from our neck of the woods, you probably can visualize this. The airport perimeter fence, that would be the airside or the airport operations area. The security identification display area, we technically don't have one today at our airport in Sweetwater County. We likely will later this year. It's based on our aircraft activity level. The next secured area would be the commercial terminal building behind the secured area, not the public areas of the building, but when you have to badge in or use a key to get into a secured area, and then the aircraft operations area, which would be the apron where the commercial airline parks, the concrete apron where the aircraft parks, that is the secured area. We are not talking about the public use parts of the terminal. We do not regulate firearms there. No airport does. That people can carry firearms in the public use areas of an airport. We're talking behind the secured area. And we're not advocating for people to bring guns to the airport, to be clear, but that's what we are trying to regulate here and control.
All right. Yeah, go ahead, Senator Hicks.
So, question here, because in this proposed amendment, it talks about restricting firearms in a public use airport. So I'm looking at that in the context that I routinely carry firearms through a lot of commercial public use airports and stuff. You know, you go through TSA, but those firearms are actually in those areas. Because we've said restricting firearms, does that now have some precedent over whether I can check my gun into a secure area or not? The way I read the language here, it would restrict firearms in those areas, period.
Mr. Chairman, Senator, excellent question. To be clear, just so the public hears it loud and clear, you cannot carry on your person a firearm through a security checkpoint. I believe what you're speaking to is when you check a firearm in your checked luggage. If I can get that clarification, make sure I answer the question properly. Senator?
Mr. Chairman, the proposed amendment doesn't specifically address that, I don't believe, the way it's worded.
Okay, Mr. Chairman and Senator, I'd be happy to work with you all on language there to fix that. The overall goal here is we don't want somebody carrying a firearm on their body in a secured area. We're not trying to keep people from checking their firearms to go hunting, to go sell them somewhere, to do whatever it is they do when they check their
I
firearm.
think we know the purpose of the amendment. It's just this amendment is not doing what you think it's doing. So I think we're gonna have to spend some time with it and get it right.
Understood,
So
Mr. Chairman.
Let's do that. Mr. Carenti and Ms. Russell, can you be here on Tuesday? Okay, because I'm gonna have to turn off public testimony. We're gonna carry this bill over to Tuesday at noon. You'll be the first ones up on Tuesday. And we'll take about another hour of testimony, and then we're gonna turn off testimony. And we're gonna have to make sure we reserve enough time to work the bill. So we are adjourned.